The Cathedral of Hesperil had not seen a coronation in 70 years. Marinvesh stood pressed against the cold stone of the western gallery, her breath shallow, her gloved hand curled around the iron railing as if it were the only thing keeping her on her feet. Below her, the nave of the cathedral stretched in a river of light. 10,000 candles burned in the great brass hoops that hung from the vaulted ceiling. The air shimmered with smoke and the clean scent of frankincense. Banners in the silver and storm blue of the royal house draped from every column. The binding was about to begin. She should not have come. For 3 days she had stayed in the small herbalist's chamber behind the kitchens, waiting for a message that never arrived. No quiet knock at her door. No folded note slipped beneath it. Only the silence she had learned to fear in the months since her world had narrowed down to one man's face. And so, at the last possible hour, she had come to see for herself. The Alpha King stood at the altar's edge, rigid in ceremonial black. From this distance, Marin could see only the broad line of his shoulders, the dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, the way the candlelight caught the edge of his jaw when he turned his head. A stranger would have seen a man carved from some hard, beautiful stone. But Marin had known him in firelight and in rain, in the hush of the orchard at midnight, and she could feel the wrongness of him from the gallery, as if a string between them had been pulled too tight. For 7 months she had known the other side of the king, the man who breathed her name into the hollow of her throat, the man whose hands had shaken the first time he reached for her, as if he were afraid she would break or run. The man who had pressed his ring, the heavy iron ring of his line, into her palm one rain-soaked night beneath the orchard wall, and folded her fingers shut over it. "Keep it for me, Marin," he had whispered, his forehead against hers. "When the council releases me from their games, I will come for it. I will come for you. The ring is my promise. So long as you hold it, I am yours." She had believed him. The ring lay against her skin now, threaded onto a thin leather cord beneath the high collar of her dress. She could feel its weight where it rested over her sternum, warm from her body, heavier than any iron had a right to be. Her other hand drifted, helpless, to the soft swell hidden beneath the layers of her gown. A second secret, newer than the ring, growing quietly in the dark. She had meant to tell him tonight. She had practiced the words 100 times in the mirror. "The houses of the Hollow Marches will now present their daughters," the High Speaker called, her voice climbing through the cathedral. "Let the Alpha King look upon them, and let the realm bear witness." 6 women in white ascended the long marble steps to the altar. 6 daughters of the most powerful bloodlines in the kingdom, each one tutored from infancy for the slim chance of this moment. At their head walked a tall woman whose hair gleamed like cold metal and whose eyes were the pale gray of a winter sea. Sorel of House Drovenmore. The Drovenmores held the iron mines of the eastern range, fielded 4,000 mounted spearmen, and had wanted their blood on the throne for 4 generations. The crowd murmured her name like a prayer answered. Marin made herself look at the king's face. She searched for one flicker of the man who had laughed against her hair, who had taught her the names of the stars from a flat stone in the orchard. She searched for any sign of the soul that had pressed his ring into her hand and called it a promise. His face was empty. "Kalin of the Vesper line, Alpha of Hesperil, blood-bound to the first of our kind," the High Speaker intoned. "You have heard the council. You have weighed the treaties. The realm awaits the name you will speak." The cathedral went so still Marin could hear the candle wax dripping. Beneath her dress, the iron ring grew suddenly cold. Not warm, the way it had always been against her skin. Cold. A small, deliberate, frightening cold, as if a door had been shut somewhere inside it. Kalin stepped forward. His step was wrong. Marin saw it at once. He moved like a man learning how his own legs worked. His shoulders did not roll the way they did when he walked. His chin sat too high. And his eyes, when at last he raised them, were not the eyes she knew. They were the right color. They were the right shape. But there was nothing behind them. No recognition. No will. "I name," he said, and his voice came out flat as struck tin. "Sorel of House Drovenmore." The cathedral broke open. Cheers crashed against the stone vaults. The Drovenmore banners unfurled along the eastern columns to thunderous approval. Wolves who had traveled from the far provinces threw back their heads and let loose howls that rattled the windows. Something inside Marin simply gave way. The iron ring, cold a moment before, flared with sudden searing heat against her chest. She gasped and pressed her palm hard over it, doubling forward against the railing. The pain was extraordinary, as if the metal had been pulled from a forge fire and pressed to her skin. Tears came before she could stop them. Through the blur, she watched Kaelin lift Sorel's hand and touch his lips to her knuckles in the old gesture of acceptance. She watched Sorel's mouth curve in slow, inevitable triumph. She watched the man she loved go through every motion of a sacred rite without one trace of the soul she had memorized. He did not look up. He did not falter. He did not seem to remember she existed. A sob tore from her throat and was swallowed by the celebration. She stumbled backward into the shadow of the gallery's columns, her shoulder striking stone, her ankle turning on the uneven flagstones. She kept moving. She had to keep moving. If she stopped, the grief would crush her where she stood, and they would find her in the morning curled at the base of the column like a forgotten bundle of cloth. The servants' corridors were empty. Every soul in the palace had gone to witness the binding. Marin ran through them blind, one hand still pressed over the burning ring, the other curled protectively beneath her belly. The child, his child, growing in her while he set her name aside without speaking it. She would not stay. She would not stand in the cathedral courtyard tomorrow and watch them place the silver circlet on Sorel's head. She would not remain in this palace where she had given a king her body and her trust, and the weight of a secret she had planned to whisper to him by candlelight. She reached her chamber. She packed, with shaking hands, 2 plain dresses, her mother's silver thimble, the bundle of dried marsh cup and ginger she had kept for the sickness that woke her every dawn. She paused at the small window and looked out over the lower city, where bonfires were already being lit in every square in honor of the new queen. Somewhere in the cathedral, Kaelin was being congratulated for his wisdom. Somewhere, Sorel was deciding which of his banners she liked best. And no one in the kingdom knew that the king's true mate was leaving by the kitchen gate with the air of his line growing inside her, and his ring still warm against her heart. Marin pressed her fingers to her mouth, then touched them to the icy glass. "Goodbye," she whispered to the dark. "May she give you the peace I could not." She drew her cloak tight, hid the ring deeper beneath her collar, and slipped out through the kitchen gate into a wind that smelled of wood smoke and snow. She did not see the figure that staggered against the high tower window above her. She did not see the king's hand fly suddenly to his chest as if a knife had been driven through it. And she did not hear, 3 streets away, the long broken cry that split the night a quarter hour later. A cry that woke every wolf within 10 leagues and made them lift their heads in answering grief. By the time Kaelin tore the cathedral apart looking for her, Marin Vesh was already a shadow on the western road. 4 months later, the village of Brindle Hollow had nearly stopped noticing its newest resident. Marin had come down out of the hills in the bitter heart of winter, a young widow, she had said, traveling north to escape the memory of a husband lost to fever. The elders of the hollow had taken in the swell of her belly, the hollow places beneath her eyes, the careful way she held herself, and they had asked no further questions. They had given her the empty cottage at the river bend in exchange for her work as a hedge healer, and she had bowed her head and accepted before they could change their minds. Now the snow had begun to soften at the edges. The first willow buds were pushing through the bark by the river, fat and green and stubborn. Marin had become, simply, the river woman who set bones and brewed teas and spoke to no one of where she had come from. And every night she lay awake on her narrow cot with her hands resting on the high curve of her belly, feeling the child kick. The midwife, old Bessa, had pressed her ear to that curve one afternoon and frowned and said, "There are two voices in there, child. Two heartbeats. Are you ready for that?" Marin had not answered. She had only smiled the careful smile she had practiced in the mirror, and she had paid Bessa in dried elderflower, and she had lain awake that night, listening to two small drumbeats inside her own body. "You are strong," she whispered into the dark. "Strong like your father." The thought of Kaelin still arrived like a blade between her ribs. 4 months. The wound had not closed. If anything, it had grown stranger, hotter, harder to set down. The ring was the worst of it. She wore it still, on its leather cord beneath her shift, because she could not make herself take it off. By every law of the wolf kind she knew, the bond between a chosen and a discarded mate should fade within weeks. The ring should have grown cold and dull and ordinary. It should have become, by now, a piece of dark iron that meant nothing. Instead, it pulsed. It pulsed with a slow, steady warmth that matched her own heartbeat. It grew almost hot when the wind came from the south, from the direction of Hesperel. And sometimes, in the strange hours before dawn, she would wake to find it beating against her skin like a second heart, and she would feel something through it. A pressure, a reaching. A man far away, pacing a long stone room and breaking himself open with grief. She told herself it was a dream. She told herself 100 times, but she did not take the ring off. "Mistress Wren?" The voice at her door was Tomley's, the wheelwright's youngest, using the false name Marin had given on her first night in Brindle Hollow. She set down her pestle and wiped her hands on her apron. "What is it, child?" Tomley's face was bright with the unbearable importance of news. "There are travelers come down from the high road. Tinkers. They have been telling stories in the inn since the noon bell. My daw says you ought to hear." Marin's hands went still. "Stories of what?" "Of the king." The pestle slipped from her fingers and rolled across the boards. "They say he is unmaking the kingdom," Tomley breathed. "They say he has sent his wolves into every village from the Salt Coast to the White Pass, asking after a woman. No one knows her name. No one knows what she did. Only that the king has put a price of 20,000 silver crowns on any word of where she might be." Marin made herself breathe. She made herself bend down and pick up the pestle and set it carefully on the table. "That is a great sum," she said evenly. "They say the orchards in the south have not bloomed this year. They say the wolves of the high pack have gone half mad and bring down deer in broad daylight. They say the king has not slept in 100 nights, and that his own counselors are afraid to stand within reach of him." Tomley swallowed. "They say if he does not find her, he will tear the whole world apart looking, and nobody knows why." "Thank your father," Marin said. Her voice came from a great distance. "Thank him for the news." Tomley left with a small, proud bow. The door swung shut behind her. Marin sat down very slowly on the edge of her cot. He was searching for her. For 4 months she had told herself one story again and again, until it had become the floor she walked on. Kaelin had used her. Kaelin had set her aside. Kaelin had been a man of crowns and counsels, and she had been a passing warmth in his orchard, and he had chosen the woman his bloodline required. But men who set their lovers aside did not rip kingdoms apart looking for them. Men who had truly chosen another did not ride sleepless from coast to pass, with a fortune offered for a single name. Unless the night of the binding had not been what it had seemed. Unless the empty face she had watched at the altar had not been indifference, but something done to him. The ring at her chest grew warm. She pressed her palm hard over it through the cloth, and at the very moment she did, a movement at the tree line beyond her window made her freeze. A shape stood between two pale birches, tall, four-legged. A wolf the color of slate and storm cloud, watching her cottage with eyes that held too much intelligence for any animal. A second wolf stepped from the trees beside it. Then a third. Then 4 more, fanning out in a loose half-circle, their breath rising white into the thin spring air. 7 wolves. Their eyes, every pair of them, were fixed on her door. The ring exploded with heat. Marin cried out and stumbled away from the window. The pain that came through the iron was not the slow burn she had grown accustomed to in the long nights. This was a hammered, sun-bright fire that drove her to her knees beside the hearth, and under the pain, threaded through it, came something else. A presence, vast and ragged and sleepless, pressing against the inside of her skull. A voice that was not yet a voice. A grief that was not yet hers. The babies kicked both at once, hard and angry beneath her ribs. "No," she gasped, both hands curling around her belly. "Not yet. Please not yet." He was close. Not the wolves, not the searchers. Him. Her eyes raced around the cottage. The back door opened on the river path, but the wolves at the tree line would run her down within a minute. The crawl space beneath the floor would betray her at the first wolf's nose. Her bone knife was on the table, but the bone knife would not save her from 7 wolves and a man whose grief had broken a kingdom. A hand knocked at the front door. Marin went still. The wolves she had seen were on 4 legs. They did not knock. The knock came a second time, low and patient. "Mistress Wren," a man's voice said through the wood. "I am no danger to you. I beg you, open the door before they come closer." She laughed once, hard and joyless. A man whose pack hunted a woman through 3 provinces was no danger. But there was no flight from this. She knew it as she rose. She crossed to the door with the iron poker in her hand, because she was not yet willing to die without trying, and she lifted the latch. 3 men stood on her threshold. 2 were warriors. She could see it in the way they held their bodies even at rest, the patient stillness of large dogs trained for one task. The 3rd man was older. His hair was iron gray at the temples and dark beneath. His face was lined like the bark of an oak, and his eyes, the deep amber of the wolf-blooded, looked into hers with an expression she had not braced for. Relief. Pure, exhausted relief. "My lady," he said, and the word made her flinch as if he had struck her. "My name is Jorand Hale, first hand to the Alpha King. We have been looking for you for a very long time." "You have the wrong house," Marin said, holding the poker steady. "My name is Wren. I am a hedge healer. I have no quarrel with kings." The old man did not smile. There was no condescension in his face, only a great weariness. "You are Marin Vesh," he said quietly. "You served 3 winters in the kitchens of Hesperal. You wore your hair under a kerchief. The king first saw you in the orchard the night he could not sleep, and you gave him a cup of valerian without knowing his face. You carry his ring on a leather cord beneath your collar, and you carry his blood beneath your heart. We are not mistaken, my lady. We have only been slow." The poker shook in Marin's hand. "Please," Jorand Hale said. "May we come in? There is little time, and what I must say to you cannot be spoken on a doorstep." Marin stepped aside because her knees would no longer hold her, and she did not want to fall in front of strangers. Jorand came in alone. The 2 warriors took up positions on either side of the door without being told. He looked once around her small cottage, at the bunches of yarrow and feverwort drying from the rafters, at the narrow cot, at the cradle she had begun to carve in secret and had not finished. Something in his face softened when he saw the cradle. "He did not name her, my lady," he said, very low. "Sorel. He did not name her, of his own will." The room tilted. Marin reached for the back of a chair. There was a draught in his cup the night before the binding. We have since traced its parts. Black hellebore, powdered moonlichen, a 3rd herb we have not yet put a name to. Together they bind a wolf's mind to outside command for 3 days and nights, and leave no trace in the blood once they have run their course. "That is not possible," Marin whispered. "We thought the same. Until the 3rd dawn, when the king woke screaming your name and could remember none of what he had done at the altar. The first thing he did, my lady, was run barefoot through the cathedral looking for you. The second thing he did when he reached your chamber and found it empty was howl, and the sound of it cracked two of the cathedral's high windows. Marin sank into the chair. The ring against her chest beat like a small drum. "Who?" she said. She found that her voice had gone strange and old. "Who would do this?" "House Drovenmore. We cannot yet prove it before a council, but we know. They have wanted their daughter on the throne of Hesperil for 100 years, and a true mate stood between them and that throne. With you gone and the king sworn before the realm to their daughter, they would have everything." Joran knelt before her. He did it stiffly, like a man whose knees had served too long. "My lady, the king is unwell. The bond between you was struck but not closed. Every day it has been pulled apart at the seams. His wolf has begun to refuse him. If he does not reach you, and soon, we fear he will fall into the wolf and never come back. A wolf king lost to the animal would not die. He would simply become a thing that walked on 4 legs and 8 kingdoms." Marin's hand went to the ring through her dress. The iron throbbed against her palm. "He feels that," Joran said. "Every time it warms on you, a like fire wakes in him. It is the only thing keeping him on the human side of the line." He drew a folded paper from inside his coat. "This was carried into the citadel 6 days ago by a falcon we did not recognize. We took it before it reached the wrong hand." Marin unfolded it with cold fingers. The seal was the curling drake of the Drovenmoors. "The herb witch has been found. She will be silenced before the moon turns. Long live our queen." The paper trembled. "Assassins," she said. "At least 3. We do not know how close. But there is more, my lady. The king is 2 days behind us at most. The bond is leading him. He will not be turned. And he will not be slow. Whatever you decide, you must decide it before he arrives, because once he is here, he will not leave without you." The ring at her chest gave a sudden hard pulse, almost a blow. And from the tree line, very near now, a wolf began to scream. Not the wolves of Joran's escort. A scream that meant warning. A scream that meant intruders. Joran Hale was on his feet before Marin had drawn breath. "They are here." The 2 warriors at the door were already moving, their bodies blurring as they shifted between the hearth and the threshold. Through the small window above the wash basin, Marin saw shapes among the birches. Not the slate-gray wolves who had watched her cottage. These were lean and dark, and they moved with the awful coordination of trained killers. At their head, stepping calm and patient from the trees, came a figure cloaked in black, the lower half of its face hidden behind a mask shaped like the long jaw of a wolf, a crossbow already raised in its arms. The Drovenmore hunters had come. The first bolt punched through Marin's window before she could draw a full breath to scream. Glass burst across the table in a glittering rain. The 2 warriors at the door exploded into wolf form mid-stride, their human shapes dissolving into long, dark bodies that hurled themselves across the threshold and into the dooryard. "The hearth cellar," Joran snapped. "Now!" "There is no second way out," Marin gasped. "There does not need to be. You only have to live until he reaches you." A second bolt hammered through the cottage wall, embedding itself a hand's breadth from Marin's head. The tip glistened with something dark and oily that gave off the faint, sweet smell of crushed yew. Poison. Marin laughed, low and shaking. "They are not trying to take me alive. The Drovenmoors cannot afford a witness." Joran pulled a long knife from his belt and pressed it hilt first into her hand. "Silver wound. It will bite even a shifted wolf. Use it if it comes to that." Then he turned, and she saw his eyes go gold, and his shoulders began to widen as the change took him. "Stay low. Whatever you hear, do not come out until you hear my voice or his." He went through her broken window in a single bound, already half wolf, and the night swallowed him. Marin pressed herself against the inner wall, the silver knife in one hand, her other arm curled hard beneath her belly. Through the shattered glass she could see only fragments, the flash of a blade, a dark shape thrown sideways into a birch trunk, the wet, terrible sound of teeth meeting flesh, snarls woven with the higher note of a man crying out. The ring at her chest was a coal pressed to her sternum, and through the ring, suddenly, came him, not in words, not even in images, in feeling. A red, tearing wave of fury so vast it stole her breath. A grief that ran beneath the fury like a deep cold river. And under both of those, a need. A single pure, clean need to reach her, to put his body between her body and every other body in the world. It poured through the iron and into her chest, and for one staggering moment she could not tell where her own heart ended and his began. Through the window, she saw Yoren's wolf go down. He was struck broadside by a much larger dark wolf and slammed against an oak. He tried to rise. Blood matted the iron gray of his fur. 3 of the dark wolves circled him, patient as crows. He was going to die there, in her dooryard. For her. Her gaze fell on the cellar door at her feet. She could hide. Jorand had told her to hide. The door would muffle her, and the cellar wall was thick stone, and she might live another quarter hour while wolves bled to death in her snow. She had run for 4 months. She had hidden for 4 months. She had let fear put her hand on every door she had opened and every door she had closed. Not anymore. She set the silver knife down on the table. She brought her palms together at the center of her chest, over the ring, and she opened the place inside her she had kept shuttered since she was 9 years old, and her grandmother had taken her by the shoulders in the kitchen and told her, in a voice like dry leaves, "Child, you will hide this all your life. You will never tell. You will never show. They burn women like us in the high villages. Do you understand me? They burn us." Maren had hidden it. For 19 years she had hidden it. Healing in common blood was a thing the priests called crooked, a thing the high houses called witchcraft, a thing the smaller villages called a reason to drag a woman to the stocks. But she was already marked for death. There was nothing left to hide for. The light bloomed between her palms like a sunrise held in a cup. It was warm. It was old. It had been waiting 19 years. Maren stepped through the broken window into her own dooryard. The effect was immediate and absolute. Every wolf in the clearing turned toward her. The Drovenmore wolves froze where they stood, instinct seizing their feet before training could pull them forward. Maren walked across the snow in her bare feet. Where she set them down, the snow held the imprint of light for a moment, then dimmed. She knelt beside Yoren's broken body and pressed her glowing hands to him. Healing poured out of her like water tipped from a jug. She felt his ribs knit beneath her fingers. She felt the long gash across his shoulder seal. She felt the bruise behind his eye lift like a drawn shade. He gasped once, hugely, and his great wolf side rose and fell faster, and he turned his head and looked at her with such astonishment that she nearly wept. A dark wolf lunged for her from the side. The light around her flared without her telling it to. The wolf was thrown back with a yelp, its black fur smoking where the light had touched it. It scrambled up and broke for the trees. 2 of its packmates went with it, but not all of them ran. The figure in the wolf-jaw mask stepped from the tree line, crossbow raised and calm as a person checking the weather. The mask hid its face, but Maren could see by the cut of the cloak that it was a woman, and tall. "Marvelous," the woman said. Her voice was light, almost delighted. "House Drovenmore will be most interested to hear that the king's little kitchen girl is also a witch." Maren's light flickered. The healing had drained her further than she had understood. The babies were still and hot beneath her ribs, gathered close, listening. The crossbow rose, and then the forest came apart. Trees crashed sideways like reeds. The ground shook. The 2 remaining dark wolves bolted into the dark, all training forgotten, leaving their masked commander alone in the clearing. The masked woman turned toward the sound. She was very fast. She was not fast enough. A wolf the size of a draft horse burst from the birches. Its coat was the blue-black of a thunderhead an hour after sunset. Its eyes blazed amber, brighter than any lamp Maren had ever seen burned. It crossed the clearing in a single clean leap. All silence and wait. Its jaws closed around the masked woman's crossbow arm, and there was a sound like dry kindling. The woman opened her mouth to scream, and the wolf shook her once, hard, and the scream stopped. And then the wolf threw her aside into the dark beyond the tree line as if she were a bundle of rags. The wolf turned in a slow circle. Its head swung back and forth, searching for one more thing to break. Then its eyes found her. Maren could not move. She could not breathe. The light at her hands had gone out of its own accord. The wolf came toward her, slow now. Every step set down with care, as if the ground beneath her bare feet might be made of glass. Blood ran from its muzzle into the snow. It stopped a pace from her. Then the great head lowered, and the long muzzle came forward and pressed, very gently, against the curve of her belly. Both babies kicked at once, hard, both sides. The wolf made a small sound, half breath, half whine. It was the sound of a creature that had been holding itself together for too long. "Kaelin," Maren said. The shift came between one heartbeat and the next. One breath, a wolf the size of a horse stood before her. The next, a man knelt in the bloodied snow at her feet. His hands lifted toward her belly and stopped halfway, hovering, as if he did not yet have the right. He looked up at her. The Alpha King of Hesperil was weeping. For 4 months Maren had imagined this moment, and not once had she imagined it like this. She had imagined a king in cold armor riding into her dooryard with a circle of armed men. She had imagined being dragged back to Hesperil in a closed carriage with the curtains drawn. She had imagined, in her worst nights, an alpha so far gone into rage that he would not even look at her face before his hands closed around her throat. She had not imagined him on his knees in her snow, with tears running soundless down his cheeks. "You are alive," Kaelin said. The voice that came out of him was not the voice she remembered. It had been sanded raw. It was the voice of a man who had been screaming at intervals for a long time and had run out of throat for it. "Maren, you are alive." She could not answer. Her hands had begun to shake so hard she had to fold them under her arms. His eyes dropped to the curve of her belly and stayed there. His hand rose halfway and stopped. He did not breathe. "May I?" he said. The words did something to her that the tears had not. The Alpha King of 3 provinces, the man who could put a wolf to its belly with a glance, was asking permission to touch his own child through a pregnant woman's dress. She took his hand. She brought it to her, and she pressed it to the high curve. A foot answered him. Then another, on the opposite side, harder. Kaelin's whole body flinched as if she had struck him, and then his palm flattened, and his other hand rose and joined it, and he was holding her belly in both of his hands like a man holding water he was afraid to spill. "There are 2 of you," he whispered. "Yes. 2. He made a sound that might have been a laugh in some other lifetime. "Maren, why did you not send word?" And there was the question that broke the spell. She stepped back from his hands. "Send word," she repeated. Her voice came out flatter than she had meant. "To whom?" "To me. To you." "Across what road, Kaelin? Through whose hand? To which of your council?" He rose to his feet. His face was ash-colored under the moonlight. "Maren. To the king who stood at the altar of Hesperil and looked through me as if I had never existed. To the king who lifted Sorel Drovenmore's hand to his mouth in front of 10,000 witnesses. To the king who said her name." Her voice broke on the last word, and she hated it. "Should I have sent word to that man, Kaelin? Tell me, and I will know better next time." "I was drugged." His hands lifted, helpless. "Maren, your hand told you what they did to me. He must have told you. I was drugged, and I would never." "How convenient." The word came out of her like a blade unsheathed, and she saw it land. He went very still. "Convenient." His own voice had gone quiet now, the dangerous quiet of a wolf that has lowered its head. "You think this has been convenient, Maren? You think any part of the last 4 months of my life has been convenient? I think it is convenient that the man who chose another woman in front of his entire kingdom has now found the woman he discarded and remembered, very suddenly, that he loved her. I did not choose her. You stood there. You said her name. I was poisoned. The roar of it cracked across the clearing. The wolves that had begun to gather along the tree line flinched as one. Do you understand me? I was poisoned in my own cup, in my own hall, by my own counselors, and when I woke from it, I tore the cathedral's tapestries from the walls with my hands. Do you think I chose this? Do you think I wanted to wake up sworn to a woman whose face I cannot stand to look at while you were gone, while our bond was screaming inside my chest like an animal in a trap? While I had no idea if you were alive or dead or in some ditch with our child gone cold inside you? His voice broke on that last clause. She watched it break. And the thing he had been hiding from her, the thing under the rage, came out into the light. He was afraid. The most powerful wolf in 3 provinces was afraid of her. He was afraid she would not believe him. He was afraid she would put on her cloak and walk back into her cottage and close the door against him forever. He was afraid that he had been a great enough fool, on a single drugged night, to lose her past finding. The fight went out of Marin as if a string had been cut. I felt you, she heard herself say. The words came out of nowhere. Every night. The ring would burn and I would feel you, walking some long room, breaking yourself open. I told myself it was a dream. I told myself 100 times. Those were not dreams. His voice was hoarse. When I slept, my wolf would reach for you through the bond. I thought I was a man going mad. I thought I was making the dreaming up out of grief. You felt that. I felt that. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up on either side of her face, careful, steady, as if she might bolt from his touch. He tipped her chin up until she had no choice but to look at him. Marin Vesh, he said, listen to me. I did not name her. I cannot have named her because there is nothing in me that could name her. The bond knew you the night I drank from your cup in the orchard before I had asked your name. I would not give that up for the throne. I would not give that up for the council. I would not give it up for any treaty in any of my provinces. Do you understand me? She could not answer. Her hands had risen, of their own will, to cover his. I have not touched her, he said. I have not been in a room with her since I came back to myself. I have her sealed in the South Tower under my own seal until the council is willing to bring the Drovenmoors to formal trial. And when that day comes, I will burn the South Tower down with her in it, before I let them put her on a throne next to me. A small, ragged sound came out of Marin's throat. I waited for you, she whispered. That night. I sat on my cot for 3 hours waiting for you to come and tell me what was wrong. I had practiced what I was going to say to you. About the children. I had practiced for weeks. Marin. And when you did not come, I went to the cathedral. And I saw you. And I thought you had simply weighed me, and weighed her, and chosen. She struck his chest with her fist. There was no force in the blow. Do you have any idea what that felt like? He caught her wrist and pressed her open palm flat against his sternum. She could feel his heart beneath her hand, very fast, very hard. Yes, he said. I know exactly what it felt like. Because I have spent every hour since the morning I woke in that bed, living with the certainty that I, with my own mouth, had said another woman's name in front of my mate. Whether the tongue that said it was mine or not, the mouth was mine. The ring against her chest beat in time with his heart. Kaelin. He bent his forehead to hers. He stood there a long moment, breathing. I will not ask your forgiveness yet, he said quietly. I have not earned it. I will earn it. But before any of that, before anything else, I have to get you out of this dooryard. The Drovenmoors will not stop with one masked hunter. They will send more. They will send harder ones. The next will not come at twilight with a poison crossbow. The next will come at dawn in numbers, and I will not have my mate and my children fighting that war from a cottage with a broken window. A throat cleared very politely behind them. Jorand Hale had pulled himself up against the trunk of the great oak. He was alive. He was on two legs again, wrapped only in the cloak one of the warriors had thrown across his shoulders, and bleeding from a long, shallow line down the side of his ribs. Marin's healing had held him together. He was nevertheless not quite steady. "My king," he said. His voice was dry as the leaves it always was. "The hunter you broke was Naila Drovenmore." The name rolled into the clearing like a stone into a still pond. Kaelin went very, very still. Sorel's cousin? Sorel's younger sister. She was the second pin in the cushion. Had Sorel failed to produce an heir within the year, she was to step into her place. Kaelin's eyes flared gold. "Then there is no more pretending. No, my king. They have moved on my mate, with their own blood, in the open." "Yes, my king." The growl that came out of Kaelin was not the sound of a man, it was the sound 100 wolves agree on at the same moment. "Then we are at war." He turned to Marin. His hand came up and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear, a gesture so small and so familiar from the orchard months that it nearly undid her. "They tried to take my will," he said quietly. "They tried to take my mate. They tried to take my children before they were born. I will let them keep none of those things, Marin. I will not let them keep as much as a thread." A howl rose along the western edge of the trees. Another answered it from the south. Another from the north. Within the space of a slow breath, the entire tree line rang with the long gathered voices of wolves. "They have come," Jorand said. Marin turned in Kaelin's hands and looked. They came out of the dark in twos and threes, then in tens, then in waves. Wolves of every size, every color, every line. Their eyes caught the moonlight in a long, low glitter that ringed her dooryard from edge to edge. She had not believed there were so many wolves in 3 provinces. She had not believed any one man could call so many to him. "My pack," Kaelin said, and his voice had gone soft and proud and grim, all at the same time. "All of them. They have been moving with us since the Salt Coast. They were waiting on my word." "What is your word?" "That we ride for Hesperil at first light. That you ride with me. And that the Drovenmores are called to answer at the heart of my hall before the next moon turns, and answer all of it." Marin opened her mouth to argue. She wanted to. She wanted to say she could not travel, that the babies needed rest, that her dooryard was full of blood she had not yet had time to feel. Then he looked at her. The amber in his eyes had softened to ordinary lamplight. There was a question in his face he was too tired to put into words. "Together," she said. Kaelin pressed his forehead to hers again, and this time he closed his eyes. "Always," he said. "From this hour to the last hour I am given. Together." And from the trees, on every side, the wolves of the king began to sing. The road from Brindle Hollow to Hesperil was a 4-day ride for a fast courier on a fresh horse. Kaelin's pack made it in a night and a morning. Marin rode in front of him on his great gray stallion. He had lifted her into the saddle without asking, and she had begun to argue. And he had silenced her with one look, and then, more effectively, with one hand on the small of her back, as if to say that the argument was already finished, and that she was simply a moment behind in noticing. "My wolf needs you within reach," he had said, low against her hair. 4 months apart almost broke us both. "I will not put a horse length between us until the bond is closed, and every Drovenmore in 3 provinces is in irons." So she had let him have his way. She had leaned back against his chest. The babies had stopped their restless turning at last and gone quiet. The way they had been quiet only a handful of times in the last 4 months. They were listening, she thought, to the heart on the other side of her. As they rode, he told her everything. He told her how he had woken on the 3rd morning after the binding to find Sorel in his bed in nothing but a robe, watching him breathe. He told her how he had thrown the woman bodily out of his chambers, how the council had been waiting for him in the small hall, how he had broken a marble table in half with his hands when they had told him what he had said at the altar. He told her of the search. He told her of the wolves sent into every village from the Salt Coast to the White Pass, of the offers of silver and pardons, of the long maps spread on his war table at midnight, of the way his hand had walked into his rooms one dawn and said, very quietly, "My king, the orchards are not blooming. The wolves on the high passes are running deer in daylight. They are running for you, my king. Whatever is broken in you, it is breaking the country." Marin listened without speaking. "My wolf knew you were alive," Kaelin murmured against her temple as they rode. "I would not let myself believe it because the not believing felt safer. Every night the ring on you would warm, and I would feel a pulse of it through the bond, and I would pretend that I was inventing the feeling out of want, but I knew. Every night I knew." "I felt the same," she said. "I told myself 100 times it was a fever dream. I never once took the ring off. I would have known if you had." "Yes." He was silent a moment, writing. "Marin." "Yes." "The night in the orchard, when I gave you the ring." "I remember. It was not a courtship gift. I knew what I was doing. I gave you the seal of the Vesper line. There is no Drovenmore on this earth who could have outranked that ring on you, before any altar. If they had not poisoned me, I would have stood on the altar that night and put your name through the kingdom in 2 clean syllables." A small fierce thing rose and settled in her chest. "I know," she said. "Now." The first faint pearl of dawn came up at their backs. Kaelin's hand, low and warm at her ribs, tightened a fraction. "Marin." "Yes." "When this is done? When the Drovenmores are answered for? The bond between us was struck the night I gave you the ring. It was never closed." "I know." "It will need to be closed." "I know." He bent and pressed his mouth very briefly to the place behind her ear. "Then we will close it. When you are safe. When the South Tower is empty. When my hall is mine again." She let her head fall back against his shoulder. The first true light came over the long ridge an hour later, and the road bent, and the towers of Hesperil rose out of the morning mist on the plain ahead of them, and every wolf in the column went still. There was smoke over Hesperil, not the thin domestic smoke of breakfast hearths. Black smoke. 3 columns of it, rising from inside the inner walls. And on the great pole above the cathedral, where the silver and storm blue of the Vesper line should have been turning in the dawn wind, a different banner had been run up. A black drake on a field of grey, the crest of House Drovenmore. "No," Joran said behind them. The word came out of him like a man punched. "They would not. They cannot have." Kaelin's arm closed across Marin's belly so suddenly that she gasped. The growl in his chest came up from somewhere far below his ribs. "They have taken my city." "How?" Marin said. "How is this possible? You have been gone less than a day." "They have not been planning this for a day, Marin. They have been planning this for years. They did not only want their daughter on my throne, they wanted me off it." A horse came down the rise toward them at a flat run. A boy on it, no more than 17, in the silver and storm blue of the Vesper Guard, his face the gray of a bone left in the rain. He nearly fell off the saddle when he reached them. "My king," he gasped. "My king." They struck at midnight. They had the captain of the inner gate. "Lord Halvard Drovenmore has declared himself Lord Regent of Hesperil. He says you have lost yourself to the wolf and cannot govern. He has named his daughter queen and called the council to ratify it at noon." Kaelin's hand on Marin's ribs was steady. The growl in his chest had not stopped. It was only quieter now. "Go on," he said. "There is more." "Yes, my king, they have hostages." The word landed in Marin's stomach. "They have taken the household servants who refuse to bend the knee, the undercook, the 2 stable boys, the woman who keeps the orchard, the chamberlain's wife. 63 souls, my king. They are to be executed in the cathedral square at noon for sedition." The boy swallowed. including the old herb mistress, the one who served in the kitchens. The breath went out of Marin. The herb mistress, Mira Halden. The thin, bent woman who had given Marin her first job in the Hesperil kitchens, who had taken in a young girl with no last name and no village name and asked no questions, who had found Marin weeping into a pot of thyme one autumn afternoon and said nothing, only handed her a cloth and made her drink a cup of tea. Who had, on the night Kaelin had begun to come to Marin's chamber in secret, met Marin in the corridor at dawn and said only, "Whatever it is, child, I have not seen you. Mind yourself." Mira had known. Mira had said nothing. And Mira, now, was kneeling somewhere in the cathedral square because she had refused to kneel to a Drovenmore. "We have to take the city back." The words came out of Marin before she chose to say them. Her own voice sounded foreign in her ears. Kaelin looked down at her. "Marin, I will not stand on a hill while 63 people die in my place. I will not let Mira be one of them because she was kind to a kitchen girl who did not have the sense to keep her distance from a king. Marin, you cannot enter that city. Not now. Not pregnant. Not when they want you dead more than they want me dead. If they catch you, then we do not let them catch me." He looked at her for a long moment, and slowly, very slowly, the thing she had seen begin in his face in her dooryard last night came all the way to the surface. Pride, a fierce, clean, frightened pride. "My queen," he said softly, "even on this road, even now, you are still thinking of someone else's mother." He turned in the saddle. He raised his voice so that it carried clean down the column behind them, and every wolf along the road lifted its head. "The Drovenmores believe they have a city. They believe their daughter is going to wear my circlet at noon. They believe they have remade Hesperil in a night." A long, low growl rolled up the column. "They are wrong." The growl became a sound that was not quite a howl, not quite a roar, that came from 100 throats at once. "Today," Kaelin said, "we take back what is ours. Today, we show the Drovenmores what becomes of those who put their hands on a king's mate, on his children, on his city, on his name. Today the South Tower opens, and the cathedral square fills, and the Hall of Vesper hears what its true tongue sounds like." The wolves answered him, and with his arm still tight across the curve of his children, the Alpha King of Hesperil turned his great gray horse toward his stolen city. The battle for Hesperil did not last the morning. The Drovenmores had expected resistance. They had not expected a tide. They had not expected a king who had spent 4 months sharpening his wolf on the whetstone of his own grief, leading a column of pack wolves who had been waiting, since before sunrise, for the order to take their city back. The outer gate fell within the first hour. The merchant quarter was theirs by mid-morning. By the time the sun reached its highest, Kaelin's wolves had pressed the Drovenmore force back through the cathedral square, through the great courtyard of the inner keep, and against the doors of the Hall of Vesper itself. Marin watched from a small protected rise outside the south wall. Kaelin had set her there, with 8 of his own wolves around her, against her wishes. She could feel him, distant through the ring. His fury was so vast it ran along the bond like a second heartbeat. His wolf had never fully come back into the man since they had ridden through the gate. She had felt the moment he had seen the Drovenmore banner over the cathedral. She had felt the moment he had set his teeth in someone wearing it. But she had not felt fear from him. Not once. A messenger came up the rise at a run, his boots slipping on the loose chalk. A woman of the kitchen guard, by her livery. She fell to one knee beside Marin and took a moment to find breath. "My lady," she said, "the king has cleared the courtyard. The Drovenmore lord has fallen back into the Hall of Vesper. He has barred the doors from the inside." Marin's stomach turned cold. "And the hostages?" "They are with him, my lady. All 63. He is sending word that if the king does not lay down arms, lay down the throne, and present himself before the noon bell, he will execute them in order of age, beginning with the herb mistress." Marin rose to her feet. "My lady," the kitchen guard began, "how long until noon?" "A quarter of an hour, my lady, perhaps less." "Take me to the hall of Vesper." "My lady," the king ordered. "I am aware of what he ordered. Take me, or I will go without you." She did not wait for an answer. She walked. The 8 wolves around her hesitated, then did the only thing they could do, and followed her at a half-circle, snarling at every shadow. The kitchen guard caught up to her at the south gate, and after that there was no more arguing. The streets of Hesperil between the south gate and the cathedral square were a memory of streets. Bodies in the silver and storm blue of the Vesper Guard. Bodies in the gray of the Droven moors. A horse with no rider standing patiently in the lee of a baker's wall. The smell of wood smoke and iron. Maren did not stop. She found Kaelin at the doors of the Hall of Vesper, held back by Jorund Hale and 3 other men. He was in human form. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. A long, shallow cut ran down his left forearm. His eyes were the high amber of his wolf, not the warm amber she had known in the orchard. "I am going through the doors," he was saying. "Either you let go of my arm, Jorund, or I will go through you, and then through the doors. My king, this is exactly what he wants." "Then he will have it." "Kaelin." He turned at the sound of his name on her tongue, and the expression on his face when he saw her crossed 3 different countries before it settled. "Maren, why are you—" "I told you I would not stand on a hill." "You promised me—" "I promised you nothing of the kind." She walked the last paces between them and put one hand flat on his chest, over the place where his heart was hammering through his ribs. "I told you I would not let Mira Halden die for being kind to me. I am keeping that." "This is not your war, Maren." "It became my war the night the Drovenmoors decided I was a thing to be tidied up." She looked up at him. The wolves of the king were watching her, every one of them, as if she had walked into the courtyard with a torch in her hand. "And it became my war the night you put your ring in my palm in the orchard and folded my fingers shut over it. I have not given the ring back, Kaelin. That makes this mine." The words "I have not given the ring back" went into him like a small key into a long lock. "Maren," he said, and it was almost a plea. "I know what I am doing. Trust me, please." She turned toward the great doors of the Hall of Vesper before he could find the next argument, and she lifted her voice so that it would carry through the wood. "Lord Halvor Drovenmore." The murmur on the other side of the doors stopped. "My name is Maren Vesh. I am the woman your daughter and your house have spent 4 months trying to bury. I am coming inside. Alone." Maren, no. She did not turn. She could not. If she turned, she would not be able to do it. "Trust me," she said. "Please." Something passed between them through the ring. It was not words. It was a long, taut, anguished thing, and then something on the other end of it loosened. Kaelin's hand fell from her arm. The great doors of the Hall of Vesper unbarred from the inside. They opened a hand's width, then a hand's more. Maren walked into the Hall of Vesper. The hall was a long, high room of gray and silver stone, hung with the banners of the Vesper line, and the banners had been pulled down. They lay in heaps along the walls like dead birds. 63 souls knelt in a long line before the dais, their hands bound behind them, their faces gray. The smallest of the kitchen boys was crying without sound. On the throne of Vesper sat Lord Halvor Drovenmore, a tall man with iron-colored hair and the long, mild face of a country physician. Beside him stood Sorel. "So this is the trouble," Sorel said, her mouth curled. "A kitchen girl with a swollen belly. I expected something more impressive. After the season the king has had, I had begun to think he had been bewitched by some princess of the wood." Maren did not look at her. She looked along the line of kneeling hostages. Mira Halden was the third from the end, very upright, her wrists bound, her mouth a thin, hard line. Their eyes met. Mira gave the smallest shake of her head. "Run, child, run while you can." "I have run long enough," Maren said. She turned back to Halvor Drovenmore. "You wanted the king to surrender. I will give you something better. The Lord raised one neat eyebrow. And what is that? Me. She rested her hand flat on her belly. His mate. His unborn line. Take me as your hostage. Release the rest. No. Kalen's roar came through the doors and shook the rafters. And through the ring, Marin felt something inside him fold up and put its head in its hands. Halvor Drovenmore smiled. It was a small, careful, pleased smile. An interesting trade, kitchen girl. Very well, I accept. Father, Sorel said sharply, we should kill her now. Be done with it. Patience, daughter. Halvor's smile widened. A dead hostage has no value at the gate. A living one, especially this living one, will buy us his crown by the noon bell. He turned to the line of soldiers at the foot of the dais. Cut them loose. Bind the woman. The hostages were cut free. They stumbled toward the side door in a low, frightened tide. Mira tried, very briefly, to come toward Marin, and a soldier put an arm out and turned her with the others. Mira's eyes did not leave Marin's face until she was gone. Hands closed on Marin's wrists. The ring at her chest gave one slow, deep beat. And under it, lower than that, deeper than that, something else stirred. Not the ring. Not Kalen. The babies. She had not understood until this moment what it meant that the children inside her were the line of the Vesper. That the line of the Vesper had not had a true mate child for 5 generations. That every priest of the high temples had said for 100 years that when such a child came again, the old powers of the Vesper line would wake with it. She had not understood until this moment that the children had been listening to every conversation she had ever had since the orchard, that they had been gathering, that they had been waiting. Light bloomed beneath her dress. Not at her hands this time, at her belly. What is that? Halvor Drovenmore said. The light spread up through her ribs. It poured down her arms. It ran along her bones like water finding the cracks in a stone. But this was not the warm, tipped-out light of the healing. This was something else. Something older. Something with teeth. This was the wolf. Pain hit her in a single crack across the spine. No, she gasped, dropping to her knees. Not now, please. Not in here. But the change would not be argued with. It had been gathering since the night Kalen had put the ring in her hand under the orchard wall. It had been waiting 4 months in the river cottage. It had been waiting all morning in the saddle. The babies had reached up through her own blood and unlocked it from the inside, and now it was coming whether the room was empty or full of soldiers. She was shifting. She was shifting in the middle of an enemy hall, surrounded by men with drawn blades, with her wrists in a soldier's hands. The doors of the Hall of Vesper exploded inward. A wolf the size of a small horse came through them like a thrown spear. Kalen. His coat was the blue-black of a thunderhead. His eyes were 2 amber lamps, and they had only one purpose in them, and that purpose was her. A howl came out of him that put the Vesper banners flat against the floor. The Drovenmore soldiers tried to form up. Sorel was screaming an order Marin could not parse. Halvor was reaching for something at his belt. Bones were breaking inside Marin's body and rebuilding themselves, and breaking again, and her own throat had begun to make a sound she did not recognize as her own voice. And through the storm of all of it, she felt the babies, very close, very calm, very pleased, as if they had been waiting their whole short lives for exactly this room. The pain was a country Marin had never crossed. Every bone she owned cracked along its length and reset. Every muscle let go of every other muscle and began the slow, terrible business of becoming something else. Her skin parted at the small of her back, at the hollow of her throat, at the knuckles of both hands, and silver-white fur came up through the openings as if a tide of it had been waiting beneath her for a long time. She could not see. She could not breathe. She could not think. She could only feel. The babies, both of them, low and warm and fierce inside her, A steady chorus that said again and again with the wordless, absolute certainty of unborn children, "Not yet. Not yet. We are not finished." And Kalen ahead of her in the hall, fighting his way to her body through Drovenmore soldiers, his fury the only fixed point in a world that had come unmoored. A weight came down beside her. Halvor Drovenmore had drawn his sword. It was not the dress sword of a council lord. It was a blade Marin had never seen, hammered to a long, thin point, the metal silver-white with an oily sheen along its edge that she recognized from her cottage wall an hour before. Wolfsbane, forged into the steel itself. "If I am not to have the throne," Halvor said, low and almost regretful, "then he is not to have you." The blade lifted. Marin saw it lift. She saw it begin to come down, and a hand caught it. Her hand. Half of it was still her own hand, her own pale knuckles, her own crooked little finger from a fall she had taken at 12. The other half was not. Long fingers, silver-white fur to the second joint, claws that had been waiting 19 years, closed around Halvor's wolfsbane blade and held it in the air a hand's breadth above her own throat. The wolfsbane burned. She could feel her palm trying to blister around the metal. She did not let go. "No," she said. The voice that came out of her was not a sound a kitchen girl should have been able to make. It carried under itself a deeper note, a long low note like the singing of a struck bell. Halvor pulled. The blade did not move. The change finished. It came in a single long pull, like water deciding at last to fall over the lip of a pan. The pain that had been everywhere went somewhere small inside her chest and folded its wings. She set Halvor's blade aside and rose up off the floor of the Hall of Vesper. She rose to 4 legs. A wolf stood where Marin Vesh had been kneeling. She was smaller than Kalen. Anything would have been smaller than Kalen. But she was tall at the shoulder and long in the back, and her coat was the white of new snow under starlight, with the smallest threads of moon silver running through it where her hair had used to part, and her eyes, when they came up to meet Halvor Drovenmore's, were bright, clean amber. She was very, very angry. Halvor took a step backward. "Father," Sorel began. Marin came across the dais. She did not lunge. Lunging was for wolves who were not certain. She walked, at a deliberate low pace, with her head down and her teeth showing, and Halvor Drovenmore stumbled all the way back to the throne and sat down on it without meaning to. She closed her jaws around his sword arm. Halvor cried out. The wolfsbane blade clattered down the steps of the dais and slid across the marble. She shook him once, the way Kalen had shaken the masked hunter in her own dooryard, because she had watched Kalen do it, and now her body knew how to do it. And she opened her teeth and let him drop, and he went sideways off the throne and lay still. Across the hall, Sorel was screaming a name now. Her father's name. Drawing the wolfsbane blade up off the marble in both hands. "Kill her!" Sorel shrieked. "Kill them both!" But the Drovenmore soldiers were no longer in the room. They had begun to drop their swords the moment Marin had come up off the floor on 4 legs, and now, as Kalen reached the edge of the dais and turned in a slow circle with his teeth bared, the last of them dropped what they were holding and ran. Kalen's wolf came up beside her. His blue-black coat brushed her white. Through the bond he poured into her a wave of pride so vast it nearly took her sideways. Astonishment. Awe. 100 small, fierce tendernesses she had no names for. "You shifted," his voice said inside her skull, in a tone that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Marin, you shifted." "I had reasons," she answered, and was surprised at how quickly the speaking came to her, as if her tongue had always known how. "My brave girl, my impossible girl." Sorel was coming up the steps of the dais with the wolfsbane sword held in both hands and a face that had stopped being beautiful. Marin shifted back. The change came as easily as putting down a heavy basket. One moment she was a white wolf with her teeth bared. The next, she was Marin Vesh, on bare feet on the marble, her dress somehow still on her shoulders, her belly still high and round and undisturbed, the babies inside her humming with quiet pleasure. Her hair fell down her back in a loose knot. She was breathing very evenly. She lifted one hand and unwound the leather cord from around her neck, and she drew the iron ring of the Vesper line out of the collar of her dress, and she let it lie in her open palm so that all of the Hall of Vesper could see it. "You came up these steps to kill the woman who carries the heir of this line," she said quietly. Her voice was her own voice now, but the deeper note had not left it. "You came up these steps with a wolfsbane blade in your hands, with my blood under your father's nails, with the blood of the woman who taught me to keep time on my windowsill on the floor of my hall." Sorel stopped 2 paces from her. "Your hall?" Sorel hissed. "My hall." Marin closed her fingers around the iron ring. "I have not given the ring back, Sorel Drovenmore. While I hold it, I am the Queen of Hesperil, and you are a guest who has overstayed her welcome." Sorel screamed and lunged. She did not reach Marin. Kaelin's wolf came across the dais in a single low spring and caught Sorel's wrist, and the wolfsbane blade fell for a second time, and this time it stayed where it landed. He did not break Sorel the way he had broken her sister in Marin's dooryard. Marin felt him decide not to. He held her hard, and the wolves of the king flooded through the broken doors and along the side aisles, and took the rest of the dais without further sound. Kaelin shifted. He stood bloody on the marble beside her, and one of his men was already stepping forward with a long cloak. He took it. He wrapped it around himself with one hand, and around her with the other. "Sorel of House Drovenmore," he said. His voice was soft. The hall heard him anyway. "Halvor of House Drovenmore, Nayla of House Drovenmore, who lies dead in a snowed-in dooryard a day's ride from here. Your house has tried to take from me, in a single season, my will, my mate, my city, and the children of my line. By the law of the Vesper, by the law of the wolf, by every right of the cathedral my own great-grandfather built, House Drovenmore is now the lawful enemy of the throne. You named me at the altar," Sorel began. "A man under the herb does not name." Kaelin's eyes were the clean gold of dawn. "The binding is void. It was void from the moment the cup came to my mouth. There has only ever been one queen of Hesperil in this season, and she is standing on my left." He turned to Marin. He turned only halfway, because there was a wolf at his back, and a hall of wolves around him, but he turned all of his attention. His free hand came up, and took her face the way it had taken her face in her dooryard, careful, fearful, certain. "Are you hurt?" he said. She paused. She took inventory the way she had taken inventory all her life as a healer. Bones, skin, the high curve of her belly, the 2 heartbeats inside it, the ring in her closed fist. Nothing hurt. Many things ached. None of them hurt. "I am well," she said. "Better than well." He pressed his forehead to hers. "The bond," he said, very low. "I know. It needs to be closed, Marin. I know. Now. In this hall. In front of these wolves. So that there is never again a story in 3 provinces about a queen of Hesperil whose claim could be questioned." She looked at him a long moment. "Then close it, Kaelin. I have been waiting since the orchard." A small sound went through the assembled wolves. It was not quite a sigh. It was nothing she had a word for. Kaelin tilted his head and bared his throat to her. It was the oldest gesture a wolf could make. The alpha of 3 provinces, the last of the Vesper line, showed her the soft place under his jaw and the great vein that ran beside it, and asked her, without a word, to close her teeth over his life. Marin rose on her toes. She set her mouth to the place where his neck met his shoulder, where his pulse hammered against her lips. She felt the heat of him, the salt of him, the long history of him under her teeth. And she let her wolf rise, only as far as she needed her, and she set her teeth into his skin. The bond closed. It did not close like the snapping of a door. It closed like two halves of a long broken thing being set carefully back into one another by patient hands. Everything that was Kaelin poured into her. She saw the orchard, the rain, the cup of valerian. The way her face had looked in the lamplight the first time he had set eyes on her without knowing that the rest of his life had just been written. She felt the ring pass from his palm to hers under the orchard wall, and she felt, on the other side of it, the absolute certainty that had moved his hand. This one, and no other. For all the years I have left. She saw the morning he had woken from the herb, the marble table, his own voice saying Sorel's name and not knowing that he had said it. The howl that had cracked the cathedral windows, the maps, the sleepless rooms. The night Jorund had found him standing barefoot in the orchard at 3 in the morning, looking at the stone where they had used to sit, and weeping. She felt the moment he had crashed into the doors of the Hall of Vesper not an hour ago, and known, with absolute certainty, that he was going to be too late. And she felt his face when he had not been too late. And he saw her. He saw the kitchen at Hesperil, the pot of thyme, Mira Halden's hand on her shoulder, the orchard from her side of it, the way his face had looked the first time he had reached for her hair. The chamber in the servants' quarters where she had waited 3 nights, listening for footsteps that did not come. The cathedral gallery. The cold ring against her sternum at the moment he had said another woman's name. The kitchen gate. The road. The river cottage. The cradle she had begun to carve in secret. By candlelight. In the last hour before the dawn shifts at the bakehouse. He saw her crouched over a pot of stew at the river cottage, 6 weeks pregnant, alone, weeping into the broth. He saw her barefooted on her own dooryard snow, with the light of the healing pouring out of her hands, and a man she had known for 1/4 of an hour bleeding under her fingers, and her chin lifted, and her voice steady, saying, "You will not have him." She felt him understand, in a single clean blow, the size of what she had done in his absence, the weight of what she had carried, the fact that she had not, in any of the 4 months, stopped being his. When she let go of his throat at last, they were both shaking. "My queen," Kaelin breathed against her hair. "My king," she answered. And the wolves of Hesperil, every one of them, lifted their heads and began to sing. The trial of House Drovenmore was the work of 3 weeks. Halvor Drovenmore lived long enough to be brought before the assembled councils in irons. He was found guilty of the erbing of an alpha, the unlawful seizure of a royal city, the murder of 63 commoners attempted in cold blood, and the planned murder of a queen carrying. He was put to the long judgment beneath the cathedral, the punishment reserved by the old laws for the highest of treasons, and his name was struck from every record kept under the Vesper line. Sorel was given a different sentence. The councils were divided over her. She had been the instrument of her house, but she had been a willing instrument, and the queen carrying was not minded to forgive her. In the end, Kaelin passed the judgment himself. Sorel of House Drovenmore was stripped of her name, of her wolf, of every right of inheritance. She was given a brown traveling cloak and a knife and a single skin of water, and she was put outside the White Pass on a morning when the wind was coming from the north, and she was told never to come south of the high stones again. What became of her, history did not record. The orchards bloomed. That was the first sign. The peach trees in the south came into bloom within 4 days of the closing of the bond, 3 weeks late, all at once, as if the orchards had been holding their breath. The wolves of the high passes came down out of the rocks and slept, the first true sleep many of them had had in months. The crops took. The river ran clean. The country, which had been bleeding from a wound it could not name, closed. Marin found, to her quiet astonishment, that the people of Hesperil did not resent her. She had braced for it. She had practiced the careful smile she would need at councils, the steady hand she would need at courts, the way she would have to hold her shoulders against the whisper of kitchen girl in every hall. None of it came. The wolves of the city could feel the bond between her and Kaelin the way a person feels a hearth fire across a cold room. They could feel that the old wound was closed. They came to court for the first months mostly to look at her. The way people come to look at a hearth that has been relit after a long winter. Mira Halden was given a small house in the orchard and a quiet pension, and was named, by Marin herself, the Queen's herb mistress for as long as she chose to keep the title. Mira chose to keep it. She came every morning to the Queen's solar and watched the Queen's belly grow and said little and missed nothing. Jorand Hale was named First Hand for Life and given the small high tower at the eastern wall as a personal seat. He accepted it with the same dry weariness he accepted everything and went on doing his work. And on a bright, soft evening in the first true week of spring, with the orchards in full bloom outside the south windows and the long light of sunset falling pink and gold across the bedchamber, Marin Vesh delivered her children. A boy first. Dark hair, like his father. Hands that, when Marin laid him for the first time on her chest, kicked his small fist against her sternum exactly the way the ring had used to. Healing in his blood, she could feel it already. He would set bones with a touch, when he was old enough to understand that touch was a thing one did with a purpose. A girl second. Smaller than her brother by a pound, but louder by a great deal more. Hair the white gold of new wheat. Eyes that, when she opened them on the world for the first time, were already amber. Kaelin held them, one in each arm, and wept again, and did not seem to know that he was weeping. "Thank you," he whispered to Marin, his forehead against hers, "for not giving the ring back. For believing me when you had every right not to. For carrying these two through 4 months I cannot give back to you." Marin reached up and traced the silver claiming scar at his throat with her fingertip. The mark she had set there in the Hall of Vesper had healed into a small, clean line that the high collars of his court coats hid completely. The matching scar on her own collarbone, where he had set his teeth in answer that same hour, was just visible above the neckline of her shift. "I never gave it back," she said softly. "Not even on the worst night. Something in me kept saying you were not done. I was right." "You were right." He bent and kissed her, very gently with the babies between them. "Always," he said against her mouth. "Whatever comes. In this life and in any life I am given after this one. You and these two and any others we are given. That is the work. Always," she agreed. Outside the bedchamber in the great courtyard of Hesperil, the wolves of the city had begun to sing. And so it was set into the chronicles of the kingdom. The story of the kitchen girl who had been given a king's ring under the orchard wall and had kept it, through 4 months of exile, against every reason to set it down. The story of an alpha who had torn his country apart to find the woman whose name had been stolen from his own mouth. The story of 2 children who had wakened the old powers of the Vesper line in their mother's body in a hall full of drawn swords, and who would, in the long fullness of time, become a healer king and a wolf queen of their own. The story of a bond that had been struck under a rainy orchard wall and could not be unmade by herbs, by councils, by stolen cities, by all the careful, patient ambition of a great house. They had found each other against everything. And, as it turned out, that was enough. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story stayed with you.